Oh boy.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Sound coming through okay?
Sounds coming through. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are. What's the being in the back called?
That's my dog Talisker, who loves to be on.
Talisker, of course. I knew that. That's in the book.
Yeah, yeah. That's Talisker. He loves to be on Zooms.
Very good. Maybe Neo will. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. That's awesome. So Sarah took your introduction. I think it was like Logic 101 class at Smith College.
Wow, what year was that?
She'll be back soon to answer that.
Okay.
So hello, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. Where are you coming from?
We're in the Chicago suburbs.
So is it freezing cold and snowy?
It is. It is. It's very cold, and I am looking out at a backyard full of snow. Here's
Wow.
Neo.
Oh, hi,
Yay.
Neil. Meet Talisker, your lovely dog.
That's great. And that's a not a border collie, but some kind of a sheep. Or is
This
it?
is a border collie. Tally's
Oh,
a border collie.
Talisker is a border collie. Okay,
He
very
is absolutely.
okay, let me introduce you. So, because I'd like to publish this conversation to YouTube. I think I
Mhm.
expressed that in the email. Okay, well, this is Dr. J. Garfield. Doris Silbert was the Doris Silbert Professor of Philosophy and Buddhist Studies at Smith College, Professor Emeritus,
Mhm.
author of Losing Ourselves, Learning to Live Without a Self, published in 2022. And do you sometimes still do classes at the University of Melbourne?
No, I work with graduate students there, but I'm not teaching classes.
Okay, very good. But you had a stint as the professor of philosophy there.
Yeah, it's a position that I have there that allows me to teach when they want me to
Right,
teach and to do things,
right.
but it's not a regular teaching position, just an associate position.
Okay, excellent. So, all right. Well, I think that covers everything that I want to cover in the introduction. Well, actually, I want to ask, I hadn't thought about what the drawing is, and maybe I should recognize it. I don't.
You
What can you tell
should.
us about
It's,
this?
it's by MC Escher, who is
Ah,
a
okay,
Dutch
I did
graphic
think.
artist. And it's called Rind, R-I-N-D. But I like it because it kind of illustrates that idea of being empty of any core, just an exterior. Um,
Excellent.
yeah,
Okay, very good. So I had an interview earlier today with Maria Schachtman of
mhm,
University of Illinois, and she wrote, I don't know whether you're familiar with the series, A Very Short Introduction. She
of course.
wrote the Self book for that. And you guys are actually you are very much aligned. I didn't think so at first because she doesn't endorse she wouldn't identify as an illusionist. Um, she describes the self as a narrative construction. Anyway, so maybe we'll get a chance to talk about her work or maybe in another call, hopefully. What I did with Dr. Schechtman, with Maria, and what I'd like to do here with you is to start with the questions that I typically ask when I'm doing my street interviews.
Sure.
Okay, excellent. So I have 10 questions here. Three are basically different forms of the question, what are you? And then three are about reasoning. And then four, Dr. Garfield, are specific to you and your work to ask you to elaborate on some things there.
Sure.
Okay. Question number one. What are you?
I think I'm a person, and as I say in the book, that means I'm a kind of causally open sequence of psychophysical processes in constant interaction with other persons and with the rest of the world in which I'm embedded.
Fantastic. Um, so then, yeah, you've answered in part this. What are your materials? What materials constitute you?
Well, there's this physical body that is again a moment in a long causal sequence. It used to look a lot different, and eventually it will look even more different than this and will decompose and become part of the earth again and stuff like that. So there's all that physical stuff. There's also all of my experiences, thoughts, and emotions that supervene on that physical stuff, but on so much else as well. There's my relations to other people, including my students, my ex-students, my family, and my compatriots here in Australia and off in America and um, around the world. There's all of those different components. So I think of a person as something broadly supervenient on a wide swath of the universe that we inhabit.
Excellent. And what are your mechanisms?
I'm not sure quite what you mean by that question. Could you clarify it?
Yeah. So, and we can maybe start with any mechanism that comes to mind that is essential or defining or fundamental, foundational to your mode of existence, the way that you interact with the world, the way that you are caused by the world.
Okay, now I understand. Okay, so I've got sensory faculties, and a lot of them. I've got, the five basic external perceptual faculties. I've got a faculty for introspection, for interoception, for proprioception. So I've got all of these sensory faculties. I've got the capacity to reason and think. Very importantly, as a human being, I have language, which is a fabulous way of gaining information about the world and interacting with other people. I've got these really cool biological faculties of digestion that allow me to stay alive, and respiration, and all of those that involve in me in a constant interaction with the material stuff happening in the world. Stuff like that, when I say I'm an open set of causally and interactive psychophysical processes, I mean all of that stuff. I'm also part of a history. So I'm interacting with the history of my culture, the history of the cultures with which I interact, my evolutionary history that determines a lot of who I am, genetic history, all of that stuff is there.
Right. And I'm looking forward to Tara coming back to this. I've jotted down that I'd like to ask you about those mechanisms of introspection. And then also, one thing that I really gained, thank you so much for this interview. Also, thank you so much for the book. One of the big things that I gained from your book and from Donald Hoffman's A Case Against Reality was realizing how much of my conceptualizations of self and world are really just metaphors, ways to try to think about the world and don't really reflect reality. So specifically, I might have a tendency to want to describe my mechanisms as limited to what's included in this circle. But that's just because that's sort of the easiest way for me to conceptualize the self. Or yeah, okay. So you that sings excellent. Reasoning. What is rationality?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? Um, I think of rationality as all right, so this takes us into a big territory because it's taking us into the territory of normativity, which is the
Of
subject of my normativity of norms, which is the subject of my most recent book, Norms in Nature. Um, as human beings, we are a unique species in that we have constituted and allow ourselves to be governed by and expect others to be governed by various norms. requirements on our behavior. Some of those are ethical norms, political norms, legal norms, norms for using words, and so forth. Among those are norms for reasoning. Um, and those are captured by canons of logic, not only deductive logic, but induction and abduction. Our ability to make use of evidence to come to conclusions, to make use of sets of premises to come to conclusions, to criticize other people's arguments, to engage reflectively and ask whether our reasoning is good or bad. And it's that suite of processes that constitute rationality. And I think that that's to recognize that whenever we think, whenever we speak, whenever we engage with others, we hold ourselves to standards of reason, is part of what makes us human and part of what allows us to respect others as human.
So
I
that's
think
great.
everybody should take a logic course.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I was going to swap out one of my questions. I had a question, how do you judge rationality? But then some of the things that you said kind of invited that question, and I want you to elaborate on that. But let me ask you, because maybe this question first is a yes or no question. Does the world have a rationality problem?
Well, if what you mean is we have too many irrational people in the world, that's for sure. Um, there are a lot of people in the world who reason fallaciously, who draw insane conclusions from data, who ignore information, who are unable to be cogent in their thinking, who accept uncritically what others say. Yes, there's a big irrationality problem in the world.
And the things that you just said, you think that there's a subset of people for whom that isn't true?
Yeah, I
That
think
who,
that everybody is fallible, so everybody makes errors in inference sometimes. The question is whether we hold ourselves to standards and expect more of ourselves. Um, and you're not irrational because you made a mistake in reasoning, because you balanced your checkbook wrong, or because you committed a minor fallacy or overlooked some data. You are irrational if you look at that and say, "Oh, geez, so I'm making mistakes. Who the fuck cares, right?" Then you're
right,
being irrational. Or when somebody else offers an argument and you recognize that it's terrible, but you decide you're going to accept it anyway because they
right.
align with your own views. That's irrational. So irrationality occurs when we stop holding ourselves to standards of rationality, not simply when we happen to fail those standards.
So, so this relates to the question of how do you judge rationality? Um, I would think that pretty rarely, I would think that quite often people don't intentionally accept things that they've identified as irrational, but because of our mechanisms of confirmation bias or our tendency to confabulate and rationalize, that it's easy for us to see absurd things as being rational. And so we can want to hold ourselves to the norm of rationality. And like flat earthers, for instance, who say, do your own research, be rational, and they really truly believe that they are being rational. What's the difference between them and, I don't know, someone, the typical representative of the faculty at the University of Melbourne, for instance?
Well, there's two things to say, I think, that are maybe slightly in tension with each other, but not entirely. One is that, of course, rationality comes in matters of degree. So you can imagine at one end, people who rarely, very rarely, make a mistake in reasoning at all or overlook relevant evidence, people who are hyper rational and very, very careful. And we find people like that in the better reaches of science and philosophy and people who make their livings reasoning. Just like anybody who, hones a skill, you can become better and better at behaving rationally. Um, and, people fall from that standard to varying degrees. At some point, you may simply commit so many errors and fail so regularly, either because of mental illness or dementia or political ideology or whatever, that we'd have to say a person's behaving irrationally because there's just too many mistakes to count as playing the same game. Let me give you an analogy, right? There are people like you and me who speak English fluently and obey the rules of the language. Now, we each commit grammatical errors sometimes, or errors of usage sometimes. We each drop a word from a sentence or fail to finish a sentence grammatically sometimes. But that doesn't mean we can't speak English. Now, you can think of a sliding scale of people who speak English more and more, less and less and less fluently. But then if you get somebody whose words are simply random and who we can't make any sense of at all, even if they believe themselves to be speaking English, they're not. And so you can get that kind of sliding scale. So that's one dimension on which we can distinguish rationality from irrationality, just the degree to which one conforms to canons of reasoning. But there's another one that's a difference in kind. As I said, each of us takes ourselves to be bound not only by the grammatical and semantic rules of English, but also by canons of reasoning. Um, so if I tell you that I've got two stones and three bowls on my desk, you believe that I've got five objects, not 50. And you would say that anybody who thinks 2 + 3 is 50 is behaving irrationally. They may have simply made an error and mistake and not notice they didn't need a zero there or whatever. But if somebody says, look, I just don't care. Numbers, who cares? Like 55 doesn't make any difference. I add the way I want to add. Then you want to say, you're not playing the addition game anymore. You're just making shit up. Or somebody who says, yeah, there's a whole lot of evidence that um, that vaccinations don't cause autism. But who cares about evidence? I want to believe that vaccinations cause autism. That's a completely different kind of phenomenon. That's simply refusal to be bound by any canons of reasoning and a willingness just to accept whatever. That's a different kind of irrationality. At that point, you begin to take yourself out of the space of reasons and see, and that's a totally different ballgame. So that's what I mean by really serious irrationality, an unwillingness to even recognize the norms of reason.
Yeah.
One thing to recognize
Um,
norms but fall short of them. It's another thing to refuse to recognize norms.
right. So just to be clear, it sounds like you consider humans fundamentally rational, that they are liable to make these mistakes, but that they have this pretty reliable capacity to yeah, answer the questions or work on the questions that are put to them.
That's right. I think that we've evolved to be globally rational. But
Well,
as you hold on, let me finish the sentence.
yeah.
But as you pointed out a moment ago, we've also evolved to sometimes fall from rationality. Things like confirmation biases, um, things like basic errors in Bayesian reasoning that are kind of also wired into us because we're wired not only to be able to think carefully, but sometimes to think quickly. And quick thinking is often non-rational thinking.
Right. So, okay. All right. Very good. Because I guess I would think that there weren't a lot of selection pressures, a lot of environmental pressures for us to get close to or to be interested, to be able to approach truth. That most of
Oh,
our,
I think that's wrong.
okay,
Um, I, Notice there's a lot of selection pressures on us, right? There's not like a
yeah,
single selection pressure.
yeah,
there is selection pressure for quick and dirty reasoning, which is not about truth, but about efficiency, right?
Right.
And that can often lead us into trouble. And it leads us into sometimes very serious trouble,
Right.
sometimes trivial trouble, but sometimes serious trouble. Just as, for instance, we've evolved for perceptual illusions as well as for perceptual accuracy. And again, perceptual illusions arise because we've evolved to perceive quickly, not slowly. And so you get quick and dirty routines that allow us to commit errors. But we've also evolved to be able to reflect on those errors and to be able to correct them, to be able to say, oh, that was an instance of selection bias. I shouldn't have reasoned that way, and to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Because people who can do that, who can also operate reflectively, who can also calmly and coolly criticize their reasoning, end up reasoning better and being more successful as parents, as grandparents, and pass on those genes. And I think that that's important to remember as well. So
Yeah.
you're right that we've evolved for certain kinds of local irrationality, but we've also evolved for a more global rationality.
Okay, so this is very interesting, and I'm going to be sending an email, no pressure, but with some thoughts and to request another conversation. I want to think about some of the things that you're saying, and I really want to be focused on.
A lot of that, I'm going to say, is the topic of my most recent book, Norms in Nature,
Okay, great. So I'm going to
about
I'll
how
read
we've
that one as
evolved
well.
to be normative animals. Yeah,
And has that already been published or
it
that's in the process now?
came out about 3 weeks ago, brand new.
Congratulations. Great. Okay, excellent. So, but I just want one little thing. You mentioned that we evolved for perceptual accuracy, and I'm thinking of counterexamples like the various optical illusions that
Right,
you can't just enlist better processes and not see and then stop seeing the illusion, see it how it is, or you can't just enlist better processes and see infrared.
right, exactly. And I point that out in the book that you're talking about, in Losing Ourselves. My favorite example is always the Mueller-Lyer illusion.
Right,
Uh,
exactly. And you refer to that and yeah, throughout the
I
book.
do. And it's a great illusion because you can draw it yourself. And as you
Mhm.
draw it, you get sucked in by it,
Yeah.
even though you know exactly what you've done, which really demonstrates, that's something for which we've evolved. So as I say, there's two kinds of pressure here, right? Or
Right.
maybe multiple kinds of pressure. But one is selection pressure to generally get it right. To detect panthers effectively when they're in your environment, right? Because bad panther detectors become panther chow and don't pass their genes on. On the other hand, the very processes that enable us to get things right most of the time also make sure that we get things wrong some of the time. And so it's a complicated balance. Evolution, of course, cares mostly about the survival of our children and our grandchildren, not about our detection of reality. It turns out that detecting reality pretty well is a necessary condition for that, but detecting reality perfectly isn't.
Right.
Detecting reality quickly is often useful, but detecting reality quickly often means that we're going to commit errors.
Yeah. I think of so in Donald Hoffman in The Case Against Reality, he promotes fitness beats truth. And so
Yep,
that's part of where I'm coming from and sort of the
that's right.
comparison that I'm doing. The another thing I'm thinking about is early on in Michael Shermer's The Believing Brain, he talks about why we are inclined to assume that there is an intentional, possibly threatening agent, rather than either investigate or assume that there isn't. So the bush moves. There's let's say, a panther. We don't know whether there's a panther, but there might be. Um, is I'm thinking about how knowing whether or not there's a panther is less important than running if there's a certain probability that there's a panther.
Yeah. The cost of um, errors of omission is much higher than the cost of errors of commission.
Commission.
And
And you're talking about that and but this is aligned with what you were saying about being efficient.
that's right.
Anyway,
That's right.
okay, very good. So let me see how we are doing. Do we have the hour until 10?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're fine.
All right, excellent, excellent. How do you judge rationality?
Well, um, you can assess rationality by looking at the degree to which the processes people use generally get them from true premises to true conclusions and not to false conclusions, to the degree to which the beliefs people have cohere with the evidence that they've got, the degree to which people are willing to look at contrary evidence and change their views. There's a lot of different components of rationality.
Or
Um, but these are examples of the kinds of things that I would look for. Ability to engage in effective deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, abductive reasoning, the ability to make use of information, the ability to weigh information, the ability to align one's probabilistic judgment with the laws of probability and so forth.
right. Okay, so I hear you about the criteria for on a larger scale evaluating someone's capacity or a population's capacity for rationality. What about an instance?
Mhm.
How do you assess whether or not you or the person in front of you is currently treating the information in a justified, well-calibrated way?
Well, it would depend upon the case, right? So if
Sure.
somebody, for instance, is placing bets, then what I'm going to look at is whether their betting behavior is reflects expected utility. But that's not the only thing I want to look at, because it might be that I'm looking at a person who gets enormous pleasure from losing money to casinos, right? And if that's so, then betting to win isn't necessarily the most rational thing. If what
Right.
really gives them pleasure is supporting Caesar's palace, then I'm going to be looking at whether or not they are betting in ways that are guaranteed to lose. So I've got to look at their own utility function,
Right.
as well as the expected utility, the expected outcomes. If somebody's engaged in deductive reasoning, then it's a little bit easier, right? You can actually ask, is each inference they have a valid inference or is it an invalid inference? Um, and then, of course, you still have the question about which logic you're going to choose.
Yeah.
But you can assess that rationally too. In some
Yeah.
domains, it might make sense to use consistent logic, and in some domains, a paraconsistent logic, for instance. And that's quite reasonable. Um, but as I say, it depends. I mean, if somebody's trying to stay alive and they're injecting themselves with bleach, that's irrational because that's unlikely to come to get to the outcome. But if they're trying to commit suicide and bleach is the only available poison, then that might be, a rational thing to do.
Right.
You got to look at people's ends, look at the
Right.
means that they're choosing, and ask whether those means are suited to those ends by their own lights, right? Because again, a failure in um, empirical judgment isn't necessarily a failure in rationality.
Right. 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 Yeah, we're judging sort of the truth, quote unquote, of the conclusions in the context of the objectives of the
That's right. That's right.
yeah. Okay, very good. And then last question regarding reasoning. How familiar are you with cognitive errors by name? Um, could you rattle off common cognitive errors, heuristics and biases?
Probably with a little bit of thought, yes, but it's not what's on the tip of my tongue.
Okay, very good,
Yeah.
very good. Are you okay? Yes. So that actually, you know what? I'll take this opportunity before we move into questions about your work with the self and in losing ourselves. I want to present something to you, give you context for what I'm doing, why I'm doing it.
Mhm.
So I've got a sense of, but also invite you to, if you'd like, define critical thinking. But I've got a sense of what your definition may be, which is going to be being willing to, wanting to, um, sort of emulate the norms of rationality, and then trying to make those valid inferences in accordance with your objectives and the information available. Something like that. I break critical thinking, so I would describe that as critical reflection. And I break critical thinking down into four parts: critical recognition, critical reflection, critical research, and critical resolution. Critical reflection, logic; critical research, science; critical resolution, some kind of good dialectic. I don't really think we've invented the methods of critical resolution like we have of critical reflection and critical research. And the foundation to all of that, critical recognition. Critical recognition, I define as I have to tweak this because of things that I learned from you actually. But I'll say before reading your book, I was eager to see the self as distributed across a brain. I was entertaining the extended mind stuff of like Andy Clark, and so I was already receptive to the things that have said here. But in any case, previously, critical recognition I would define as recognizing that you are a fallible brain that didn't. I subscribe to the fitness beats truth. I was very convinced by Case Against Reality. So recognizing that you are a fallible, deterministic brain that didn't evolve to know truth, and then learning some of the different cognitive errors that we've identified and named so that you're in a position to recognize them when either you commit them or when your conversation partner does. So that for me is what's missing, what the difference, although maybe that exact definition of critical recognition isn't had by, for instance, all people that I would consider fairly reasonable, having that humility, knowing that there is reason to be humble about our impressions, is what separates the faculty members I referred to from the flat earthers that I referred to. I want to hear what you think about that.
No, I think that's quite reasonable. I would actually take it one step further.
Cool.
Um, and that is to recognize that not only do we evolve to make specific kinds of empirical errors, but we've evolved to commit one enormous error of illusion.
The
And
self.
that is, well, two. One is the self. The
Okay.
other one is the illusion that our senses deliver us the world as it is, as opposed to seeing that what we're doing is constantly constructing the world that we inhabit. Um, I always call this as the deep confusion of something that we made with something that we found. Um, it's
Mm.
and that is an absolutely impossible error to sort of stop committing at
Right.
every moment because
Because we don't
just
find things. We only really can construct.
only construct. And so the idea that, and this really has to lead to epistemic humility, right? Because the idea that somehow the way that I construct the world is the right way to construct the world
It's
is,
laughable.
yeah, it's absolutely laughable. I mean, my dog constructs it very differently, and he's convinced that his way is better. And there are bees who construct it, very, very differently, and they're sure that their way is better. And the idea that there is a way that the world is the stupidest illusion of all. Um, Part of my research is in Buddhist philosophy, and and that makes its way into my book, as you know. But my one of my favorite lines in all of the vast Buddhist literature is one from a sutra called the Lankavatara Sutra. And the line is very simple. It says, "This world is not as it appears to be, nor is it otherwise." Um, because a lot of people say, yeah, it's not this way, it's some other way. The point of the Lankavatara Sutra is there is no way that the world is, and there's no content even to the idea that there's a way that it is. So once you recognize that kind of pervasiveness of illusion, and then you recognize that that applies not only to the external world that we regard as external, not just to trees and dogs and cats and beaches and sunsets, but to our own thoughts and to our own minds and to our own cognitive processes, that each of those is only delivered to us via an introspective or introreceptive sense that is also only creating rather than reflecting. That's when you recognize that not to be an illusionist is to be insane.
And arrogant, yeah, yeah. So that answers my question about mechanisms of introspection because I was thinking that but I mean of course I had read the book, so I don't know why I was thinking this, but I'm happy uh I guess you don't believe that there are mechanisms that give peculiar access to the self, right?
Absolutely not. For one thing, I don't
Yeah.
think there's a self to which we can gain access, but
Right.
even to our own cognitive, affective, sensory states, um, we only know them as they appear to us, delivered by our introspective faculties. Just as I only know the objects on my desk as they're delivered to me by my visual faculty. And
Yeah.
that's not the way they are. That's the way my occipital lobe is
Right.
constructing them. And
Right.
as soon as I know that, the idea that somehow the external world might be given to me in a really mediated way, but my inner experience is given immediately, just looks like a stupid error.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the myth of the given.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and the myth of the given is the most pernicious,
Yeah.
pernicious illusion to which we're susceptible.
Yeah. Last year, Sellers had a good rebuttal or rejection of the myth of the given.
Sellers who really coined that phrase and really
Yeah.
and really taught us to really question that. That's an empiricism in the philosophy of mind.
Yes. Uh, um, okay. I think I had another thought, but I just lost it. I want to run something else by you. So one of the things that we came up with in order to help give people what I was calling critical recognition is an acronym. It's a list of what I think are, let's say, the six most important categories of illusions that minds have about minds. Oh, I remember what the other thing was. As I process what you were saying about reality, there is no way that reality is. Reality only is there only has appearances, only exists in the context of sort of the beholders. And that's very much like persons, that there
Mhm.
isn't in any sense an objective, I guess, person or definable person. It can only be defined and understood in the context was the major point
Yeah,
in your book. Okay, very good. So I call it the Warsaw Illusions because I came up with it in Warsaw. The letters are, oh, what's that?
I'm just laughing. I
Oh,
like.
very good. The letters are WERSAS, so like Arkansas, Warsaw. So will that there is this first cause capacity for will, and
Yeah,
that will is the source of all of our behavior, that all of our behavior is attributable to some coherent set of desires. Essence, that we are this singular unity. rationality, and so there we might not be aligned, and so I'm gonna think more about what you had to say there. Sense of the world and introspection, that it's reliable. That's a myth that we don't really don't sense much at all, that it's just construction. And then attention and storage are the other categories. And then other candidates are morality and maybe emotion, or maybe that can be worked into sense. I don't know.
Well,
What do you
you're
think
going to
about
like my next book then,
Great.
because it's
Excellent.
looking at how to naturalize each of those kinds of normativity and pointing out that none of them are transcendentally given. Not
Excellent.
the
Okay,
ethical,
very
not the
good.
epistemological. Yeah, you're going to like the next book.
All right, excellent. That's awesome. Okay, very good. And then and again, you'll be getting an email from me. So very exciting. I'll get that book under my belt. Okay, so all right, very good. So questions 7 through 10. Um I want to know, how does your vernacular differ? Another way that I wrote that question is, how does your paradigm about your mode of existence manifest in your language when you refer to your thoughts, your actions, your intentions? Is there a difference? Do you use I less? Have you coined?
No, I don't think that one has to change one's language in ordinary speech, but I think one has to think differently and consciously about how that language is functioning. Um, so
Right.
um, I'm trying to figure out where to begin on this answer. Okay, so I'll just begin, and I might talk in circles a little bit. The first obvious one are pronouns, first person, second person pronouns. We tend to think pre-reflectively that the first person pronoun refers to a self. And so then we can distinguish between I and my body, my mind, my thoughts, right? And that the I refers to that thing that stands behind it. Um, and you got to stop thinking that way, right? Um, in the way that, for instance, if you thought that the name Hamlet referred to Sir Laurence Olivier or to Benedict
Benedict
Cumberbatch,
Cumberbatch.
you're out of your mind, right? It refers to a very abstract sort of character in a play. Um, so we start thinking differently that way as well. We also think differently, therefore, about those to whom we refer to as you. Again, I don't think that when I'm speaking to you, it's one self speaking to another self. I kind of recognize that we're engaged in an open exchange of information between two, relatively local systems that are each, again, openly engaged with the rest of the world. And so that really brings the second person into the third person, so that the third person's the background, the social context is always part of our conversation. Um, that changes the way we think about our own actions and our own achievements, as well as the actions and achievements of others. And this is the kind of ethical lesson that, for instance, philosophers like Shantideva teach us, right? That if you do
I'm not
something,
familiar. Say the name again.
Shantideva, an 8th century Indian philosopher.
I think I had. Okay, yeah, I think I've come across that. Okay.
You've come across him before, yeah. But you might have pronounced him differently if you
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah,
how to read Sanskrit transliteration, right? You might
yeah,
have said Shantideva or something,
yeah,
and then all the Buddha studies people would laugh at
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. And that's why now I understand why they were always laughing at me.
that's right, that's right. That dude doesn't know Sanskrit. Can't take him seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, Shantideva points out beautifully. He says, sometimes when people accomplish something, their immediate reaction is pride. But the more appropriate reaction is gratitude, right? You don't say, wow, I won the Australian Open. You say, thank you to my coach and my parents, right? Um, and that's really different. And that generates a much better way of being in the world. If somebody does something that offends you or annoys you, you don't think that asshole acted freely in order to ruin my life. You think something's going on in that person's life that's making their behavior pretty dysfunctional now. That's kind of worrisome. So, the example I like to give is somebody cuts you off in traffic, and the first thing you want to do is lean on your horn and say, "What are you doing to me?" And you think maybe they're really rushing to the hospital because their kid was just injured. Um, and that gives you a different way of thinking about the way people are behaving. Or maybe they're simply suffering from mental illness because of a lifetime of trauma, in which case my appropriate reaction isn't anger, but care. Um, so thinking in this way in terms of open interdependence changes not just the way you think about the way first person, second person, and third person pronouns work, but it changes the way you think about moral reactive attitudes. Um, and I think that's really important because we often grow up in contemporary European cultures, thinking that, for instance, anger is often a justified or a necessary reaction to harm or to evil or to political positions we disagree with. And we think that we should raise our kids to be proud of themselves and to feel independent. And that's all crazy, right? What we need to do is raise our children to feel interdependent, and we need to raise them to feel grateful and to feel concerned, but not to feel independent and proud. When we say, I want my kids to stand on their own 2 feet, you've got to ask yourself how stupid that idea is. Do they
Yeah.
have to also have sewn the shoes that they're standing in? Do they have had
Right.
to create the dirt that they're standing on? Um, you know, exactly what are you talking about? When we
Right.
ask people to be original, are we saying that they can't take seriously anything that anybody else has ever said and that they never could have learned anything in school? Again, all of this reflects the difference between thinking about selves, thinking in terms of selves, and thinking in terms of persons. So I think that's the transformation that you want there. It's not
Right.
necessarily a transformation of the language you use, but a transformation of what you think that language is doing and of what
Yeah.
it does to you morally and politically.
Yeah. I mean, I get you. All of that sings for me, I guess, except that, you use the word persons because self is so loaded. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking that when I use the word I, that I'm exerting a pressure on myself to stay consistent and coherent because I already have mechanisms that are going to favor being consistent and coherent within myself, that my thoughts must align with each other. And I feel like I am reinforcing that by using I rather than trying to use language like how people say my heart, my gut, my mind, and so on.
Yeah. I agree. I think that using I, but using it self-consciously to refer to the person I am, is much better than talking about my heart, my gut, because when you talk it that way, then you really think there's a difference between me and my heart, or
Right.
me, my gut. And that's
Yeah.
maybe more reifying than using I, as long as you're using I self-consciously and
Right.
thinking, I'm talking about the person I am. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about some independent ego.
And so I guess, but for me, so I have
I'm
a
not looking
friend.
for language reform. I'm not looking for language reform. So when I introduce the terms person and self, I'm introducing them to draw a conceptual distinction.
Right.
And while I recognize that other people use those terms differently, um, I'm using the term person pretty directly because A, of its legal significance, but B, because of its etymology and its relationship to roles.
Dramatist, yeah, roles. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we won't get a chance in this conversation to get to it, but I've got a framework of the mind that has like some language involved, some vocabulary. Basically, I think of every piece of the mind, and this can be extended well beyond the brain, as an it. So that's an if-then, basically pairing, a condition consequent pairing. If this input, then voting for this output. And so the way that I'll sometimes talk about myself is summits, and that's like one word. Summits are doing or reacting to this, and summits are this, so that I can distinguish between the different psychophysical processes that constitute me when they're not um, aligned. That that must have some appeal to you, no?
Well, some appeal, but I think it's maybe simplistic. I mean, what it reminds me of are, Alan Newell's production systems of the 1960s and 70s, early AI stuff that
Uh,
was deeply connected to a particular version of behaviorism that was coming out of people like Clark Hall and B.F. Skinner. Um, that regarded cognition as always what he called them were condition action sequences, right? So that when we detect a condition, we perform an action. Now that models some of our behavior and some of our thinking, but not all. And there's a reason why production rule systems had a very short lifetime in AI and in cognitive science. Um, it's because they're incapable of dealing with the complexity of multiply present conditions, um, and and
well,
and 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 very difficult for generating the kind of hierarchical reasoning that we often use in the meta theory and the kind of meta reflection. So yes, they're useful for some things, and some aspects of our cognition is very much condition action sequences. And that was the kind of truth in that sort of early behaviorism. Um, but we're more complex than that. And
right.
so that can be a piece of a cognitive model. It can't be the architecture of a cognitive model.
So when we phrase it as input from the exterior and then output to the exterior, absolutely. Um, Artificial neural networks, though, the computation does involve the output of one artificial neuron being the input to the next artificial neuron.
Yeah,
So
but that's a local piece of architecture, not a global piece of architecture.
what
Um,
does that mean?
well, that means that you're right that for any synaptic connection, you've got effectively a condition action sequence. That's what
Right,
inspired all this, right? But
right.
it doesn't follow that that models the way that the network itself interfaces with what's exterior to it.
Okay, okay.
That's a
Yeah, okay.
fallacy of composition, right?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, because I guess I'm just thinking of it as all cause and effect. So whether we call it condition consequent or cause and effect, that can be expanded sort of on any scale. It doesn't have to be local. It can be global. This cause and whatever,
That's right. That's right.
wherever.
But there are different kinds of causal relations is the problem. Many
Okay.
different kinds of causal relations. So there are the causal relations, say, between deficit spending and inflation, that are very different from the causal relations between um, a billiard ball hitting another billiard ball with a particular velocity and the other one going off with a different trajectory.
Right.
Um, and so while you might be able to use one model of causation, one kind of system, it doesn't follow that the same model is going to apply at a higher level. So if we look, for instance, at quantum mechanics, we've always got a probabilistic kind of causation, but it doesn't follow that when you get to a larger ensemble, everything's going to be probabilistic. Things may go deterministic.
Right. Right. Okay.
So So you really have to think very hard about level of description. So whenever anybody says it's all just, I just want to say that's false without hearing the rest of the
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
hearing the rest. sentence, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to talk about the multiple levels at which the universe is organized.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I mean, I guess there's also a difference between having a useful metaphor or narrative like Newtonian physics,
Mhm.
versus trying to have an objectively true model. So there can be a useful model where well, no, I'm just gonna think more about that.
Yeah, I would say think more about that one because you're about to get yourself into a hole.
How?
Because what you're going to be doing is saying, okay, I can distinguish useful from true. And now what you're going to have to do is figure out what's going to count as true. And that's going to turn out to be complicated because if you're a pragmatist, that's going to mean really useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of thinking to be done there because what you haven't thought about is what you mean by true.
Well, I'm less concerned about what true means. I'm
Oh,
thinking about utility. I'm thinking
yeah.
about
Oh,
use.
then notice that you've got yourself into the very hole that I thought you were going to get yourself into, where you say, "Oh, this one is merely useful, but this one is true." And if you define true in terms of useful, then you have failed to
No,
draw
no,
the
no. I'm
distinction.
not. I'm forget true. Forget what's true. There are a lot of things that are unknowable and difficult to describe.
That's right.
And what I'm saying is I'm trying to put aside that category of trying to come up with a model that describes reality. What I'm interested in is a model that is useful. uh, Yeah, that it seems useful in reality.
Right. Then the distinction that you drew a couple of minutes ago between Newtonian physics being merely useful, but another physics being true, is not a distinction to which you're entitled.
Okay. Okay.
That's all I'm pointing out. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so like I say, do think about this one a little more.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. What is a mantra regarding the self that you would recommend regarding persons?
Um,
Do you have like a one-liner that is useful for sort of regrounding when we get caught up in a sense of self as a
you're the role, not the actor.
you're the role, not the actor. Excellent. What might you suggest that I ask so I do these street interviews where I ask persons about being a person and about what their nature and function is as they see it. Um, does anything come to mind that would be an interesting question to ask people out on the street?
Gosh. Um, yeah. Um, tell me about how you're interdependent. Tell me how you're independent. I think it'd be fun to explore that ideology. I've actually done a little bit of this, by the way, in a study that a couple of students and I did on conceptions of the good life. And we were just asking people on the street, um, non-Tibetan Americans and Tibetan Americans, um, what the good life looks like. And it was a lot of fun to see how dramatically different those were. Almost all of the Tibetans were talking about ideas about interdependence, and almost all of the Americans were talking about individualism. Notice this will always be culturally inflected. So if you're
Right.
asking people on the street, think about the backgrounds of the people you're asking.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. All right. Very good. And then the last question. So I'm interested in my interviews trying to um, see how I can encourage an interviewee to relinquish this idea of this atomic self. or this reliable consciousness or this consciousness as we imagine it. Um, so as a professor, did you evaluate students' grasp of like the illusory nature of the self, or how did you how would you evaluate that?
Oh, I wouldn't. That is my job as a teacher isn't to get students to believe what I believe.
Sure.
Um, my my job as a teacher of philosophy is to get students to learn how to think, how to write, how to argue. And so I'm not interested in whether they're right or wrong by my lights. I'm
But
interested in the
but you
cogency of,
are interested in their level of understanding of things, regardless of whether or not they adopt
sure,
those things.
sure,
So how would you
sure.
evaluate students' understanding of the idea that the self is illusory?
Their ability to explain the arguments, to explain what would lead somebody to believe that, to explain what the opposing view is, what the arguments
Yeah.
are for that, to bring them into dialogue.
Okay, very good. All right. And well that I mean that basically takes us. Do you have any other comments or thoughts that I didn't leave room for?
No, I
That
thought
didn't
you ran
invite?
a really good interview. You obviously know what you're doing.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Um, okay, so I've got questions because I might be missing something. I've got so I think I'm gonna send an email where I get the chance to try to elaborate a bit more
Okay.
on the condition consequent thing and
Yeah,
it
I
potentially
won't promise that I'm going to get to that quickly.
no
And
problem.
reason for that is I've got a lot of junk on my desk that's deadline related right now, and then a whole bunch of visitors coming from the snowy northern hemisphere to
Yeah.
Tasmania in a row. So between trying to deal with letters of recommendation and tenure decisions and manuscript reviews and guests, I'll
Yeah.
be putting almost everything that is not deadline related or hospitality related on hold for the next couple of months.
Very good. Yes.
That's
Well, that's actually perfect because I'm thinking about the summer and like late spring. So that's really great. Last question.
yeah.
Can the fiscal deficit of a country lead to an eight ball going in the corner pocket?
No, I think that makes no sense at all.
Someone couldn't hear that, oh, there is this deficit. I'm concerned about money. I'm gonna go put a bet on on a certain, table on a game of billiards, go over to that table and be
Yeah,
affected.
but now what you've done is you put a whole bunch of other stuff on the into the causal story
Yeah,
there. But it's not the deficit itself causing the eight ball. It's the deficit plus this person's crazy view about what it would be rational to do or fun
and
to do.
yeah, okay, very good. All right, very good. Thank you very much, Dr.
You
Garfield.
bet. This was fun.
It's
Take care. And
good. I'm
Sarah,
glad.
really good to see you again after all this time.
I know. I'm so glad you agreed to do this. We really appreciate
And I'm so glad that Sarah looked you up and saw that you had written this book, Losing Ourselves, because she knows I am gung-ho against the self-illusion. So it was a really, really nice read. Oh, absolute last thing is that I will say had an altered state of consciousness journey between chapters 7 and 8.
Mhm.
And boy, I really experienced me as just a channel or a conduit of causes that precede me and effects that will follow and was just feeling an enormous amount of gratitude for your book and for other things that I had witnessed before that, and so I definitely understand. I had an understanding that I had never had before. I gained an understanding that I hadn't prior. of what it means to just be a sort of location or section of the causal nexus.
Well, thank you. I think that's really nice. If the book did that for one person, it was worth my writing it. So then I'm very happy.
Good.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll
very
be
good.
intrigued to hear what you think of Norms in Nature.
Thank you
It's a,
very much.
a much bigger picture book in that way.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Garfield. Have a great day.
Yeah, I will. And you guys have a great evening and stay
Thank
warm.
you. Thank you
I'll
very
probably end up
much.
on the beach.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. We wish. Bye.
See ya.
See ya.